For years now, Enbridge has said that it's in near perfect condition, but in the last month, we've found out that the pipeline is missing supports in really long spans, and that the protective coating on the outside of the pipeline is actually peeling away, and in some places bare metal is showing, which is a main factor for corrosion.
Because the main risk to that pipeline is corrosion.
Correct.
I sit on the Governor's Pipeline Safety Advisory Board. Enbridge Energy was just in there in March and said, these don't exist. There aren't gaps. The coating is intact and in good shape. We now learned that there are gaps in it, and now they tell us they're going to fix it. So where do we start believing? Do we believe them when they said that there were no gaps to begin with? Well, that was a lie. That's demonstrably false.
So the first day when I received the phone call from Brad Shamla explaining that there had been some areas found, the formal public statement that came out that day was that these areas that were without coating were about the size of a Band-Aid. But based on the discussion of what we knew at the time, at least the one that was publicly acknowledged, I do own a Band-Aid of that size. It was more like one of these, like when you rip up your knee. But that day I wasn't told that this was the size or this was the size. I was told there was nearly a foot square. So something more like this size. What we now know from the additional findings was that the largest area was actually about 1.7 foot square. So about that size.
It's called a holiday. When there is an actual break in the coating in a pipeline, it's called a holiday. Don't ask me why. I only learned that.
It's a sweet name for
Isn't that amazing?
Like catastrophic environmental culprit. Okay.
Well, this is a piece of Line 5, a coupon we call it, that we took out during part of some repair work. Mm-hmm. So you can see kind of what went into making this pipeline, what it's made out of. You can see the thickness of the steel. It's nearly an inch thick steel.
7/8, yeah.
This is the coating that we used on it, which is a robust
well, and it's
tar enamel coating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can see that it's what we call a seamless pipe because there's no side seams.
What I have here are exact size models of the two kinds of pipe used in this pipeline. You have the one you're holding, and that's the pipe that goes over the straits, and it is thick-walled, seamless, very heavy pipe. And then the other 641 miles are this thin-wall, seamed pipe that is typical of all the pipelines put in after World War II. And they're the ones you read about in the news all the time, breaking. The 20-inch seamless pipe was coated with coal tar, then wrapped with fiberglass saturated with coal tar, and then wrapped with asbestos saturated with coal tar, and then wrapped with wooden slats like this, held on with steel band to protect it from being abraded on the bottom. Okay, so this is what was the guys at Bechtel designed. Now, in fact, they had problems when they pulled the pipeline across the straits, and they tore off most of this. So the thing was compromised right from the beginning.
Wood is not used any longer in pipeline technology.
No, they were trying to figure it out. They didn't know how to build a pipeline like this. All they'd had was a little experience going across the English Channel in World War II with 3-inch pipes.
So anyway, this gives you an idea of the variability of currents in the straits. You don't know which way the currents are going to be from one day to the next. If there happened to be an oil spill, which way would it go? And that's what I did. I did 6 simulations of tracer particles moving back and forth in Lake Michigan, just to get a feel for things. The straits are that tiny part that connects Lake Huron and Lake Michigan, and you really can't predict the flow in the straits without knowing what's going on in the entirety of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. So here we go. Nope, I was wrong. First to the west. Okay. So now the particles are all released. It's over 12 hours. We're now 1 day, 2 days.
Because this pipeline is so deep in the water, around 200, 300 feet at certain locations, there will be mixing of oil, and it'll transport at different water columns, at different distances, in different directions.
You've already covered most of Boblo Island there, and there's still a possibility that things could be moved way into Lake Michigan. just in a day or two.
The Mackinac Island's completely covered in oil, and what we learned is that when this happens, they shut down all navigation in the area. And so anyone on the island would not be able to leave without being transported by air.
They knew these currents were strong in there. They navigated that area.
Yeah, the first reports of the currents in the Straits come from a French fur trapper in the 1600s when he was trying to sail over to Mackinac Island from Mackinac City.
And
he got becalmed, and essentially his diary says, "Sacré blues, these currents, they go everywhere."
The cool part is, now he says, in some seasons, it so falls out that the currents run 3 days eastward, 2 days to the west, 1 to the south, and 4 northward, sometimes more and sometimes less. The cause of this diversity of currents could never be fathomed, for in a calm, they'll run in the space of 1 day to all points of the compass, sometimes one way, sometimes another, without any limitation of time, so that the decision of this matter must be left to the disciples of Copernicus. And
Now, you knowing what you have now with all your sophisticated gear and everything that you have, how accurate was he in his assessment?
Spot on.
Okay.
That's perfect. What I wanted to mention, disciples of Copernicus are scientists. That's us. The biggest peaks here are around 50,000 cubic meters per second. To put that in perspective, the flow over Niagara Falls is about 5,000 cubic meters per second. So this is 10 times the amount of water that goes over Niagara Falls is moving back and forth between Lake Huron and Lake Michigan every 2 or 3 days.
What was your reaction when you first
Well, I
heard
thought-
how old that thing is?
Yeah, I thought, if there was an accident with a pipeline like that, I thought this is a bad place to have an oil spill.
Natural disasters, the community comes together and everyone helps each other. But when you have man-made disasters, people separate and become very confrontational because you're competing for resources to try to protect yourself. And you're competing with Enbridge in this case to try to get the best that you can for your family.
It was a normal day. I think I went to town that day, and I smelled the oil but didn't think much of it because I was used to them putting the propane smell in down there, and maybe somebody was putting asphalt. But then I came back and there was a fire truck telling me that there was oil here. They didn't know how long the road would be closed, but I told them I lived here, so they let me come on down. I came down to the creek and saw oil everywhere. There was a sheen over the entire creek.
You got flood stage when this thing happened. So if you look out at the bridge, the water was up to probably the second line on there.
Mm-hmm.
They thought it was something called a column separation. That's where a bubble impedes the flow of product through the pipeline. And the way to get past that bubble is to increase pressure and product flowing through. And so they did that twice. They turned the pipeline off, turned it on, trying to bypass an alarm, a column separation alarm that they were interpreting. And they pushed more product through the pipeline, and it resulted in over 1 million gallons being released into the environment.
We were in the red zone, so we were, there was a mandatory evacuation for a couple of days.
I called my daughter, the physician. She called me back an hour later and said, take the pictures off the wall, leave that house, and never walk back in it.
I wanted to walk on my yard, and a security guard said, "This is a hard hat area, and I'm certainly not going to give you mine."
I'm the construction manager. What's going on here? This is my house, my property. You need to leave. I said, it's my house, my property. They linked arms and walked us to the road. The customer told me about 6 months ago that the air quality reports have been released now by a company in Muskegon. 4,000 times the max allowable benzene in the air, day after day after day at that decontamination site. And we're working 300 feet away from it.
This location, because it was so saturated with oil, it was 2 years down the road, and in a hot day like today, or the hot days we've had this week, you could still smell benzene 1 year, 2 years.
How's your health been? Have you noticed anything?
Short-term memory loss. There's a list of things.
It was life-changing. And I'm angry that they knew that the pipeline needed repair years before it broke. I'm angry that when the alarms went off, they disregarded them and hit reset numerous times.
Exactly why that broke there, I can't say, but what's important to understand is Enbridge had imaged the crack, a 58-inch long crack in the pipe where it broke in 2005 with their inspection program. And they said, oh, that 58-inch long crack is just fine. We'll come back and look at it
They'd
again.
seen that exact crack?
There were 6 cracks right in that area. They documented it. Their pipeline integrity guys looked at those cracks and said, oh, those are okay. They're not going to run. We'll look at it again in 2010. And they didn't make it.
Generally, when I'm up there, I'll pay a visit to one or the other station or both, just to see if I see any signs of life or
You were
maintenance.
saying you were there in the wintertime.
I was there in the wintertime, several days after the last snowfall, and there was no indication that either a vehicle or a human being had been at either of these sites. We went to both of them. So these are, maybe they're designed to be unmanned, although I think I've heard the company claim otherwise, but there's not day-to-day maintenance going on from either location or at either location. There's nobody there, and I've checked often enough, so I feel like I've got a small sample.
So we were there recently. We were up at the Straits, and we visited the South Station, and we visited the North Station.
Mm-hmm.
We just drove by. We didn't see anybody there.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it? Is that an unmanned facility?
No, the South Station is manned, and
But we didn't see footprints. We didn't see tire tracks. We didn't, and we were there after it had snowed, things like that. So how do you? That's another thing that made us feel a little unsafe about what's the day-to-day maintenance, what's the day-to-day monitoring that's going on there. How does it work?
Okay, well, the South Station is a manned station, but we also do have a emergency response team based in St. Ignace in an office there. So those would be the guys that would be the first to any incident, the first to respond, and or first to check things out. And they do get calls. I mean, they've all been false alarms up to this point, but
really?
when there is a sheen seen on a body of water in the area, even if it's not Lake Michigan, those guys will be the first ones out. They'll help local emergency responders identify it, and they'll help lend a boom or help with cleanup or things like that. So there are guys there. There are guys at the South Station, and we do have emergency response equipment housed there. But primarily, the people watching the line 24/7 would be our control center in Edmonton, and they're constantly monitoring it. They know what's going on at all times. If they see any kind of issue, they could shut it down right away, remotely.
North Straits Station, and it's completely empty, and the parking lot is empty. This place is clean as a whistle. It's quiet. I don't hear a thing. I do see a pipe where the oil goes into the ground and goes under, and then there's one of our markers over there. So right underneath our feet is where this is stretching down to the beach and out into the water. What was that? What was that?
I went by that sign there, that post, and it said, please stay in your car.
Please scan your card.
Indication that this is a high voltage fence, this is as far as we go.
Please scan your card.
Thanks.
I think they're vultures.
Those are vultures. Yeah, so
They're
we're
not trying to migrate.
no, they're sticking around.
Yeah, they're a little creepy.
Okay. Let's get the hell out of here. This is the North Station.
They say they can shut it down instantaneously. That's 10 minutes, okay? It's pure BS. Basically, it's like a freight train. You can't shut it down just at the valve in St. Ignace or in Mackinac City because you're going to end up having a pileup. You got to shut it down starting in Duluth, Superior, Wisconsin, and then you got to shut it down in
2 or 3 locations on the way to St. Ignace.
And they have done some exercises where they put out recovery equipment. And you can actually see these from overhead, the skimmers and the equipment. They look like ants on a mountain.
If they deployed booms out into the straits and they did some kind of skimming, I mean, how effective is their, and how prepared are they?
Oh, 2 different questions.
For capture. I mean, how
2 different
seriously?
questions. First of all, conventional oil capture methodologies won't work in the Straits of Mackinac. Let's get down to the basics. First of all, the currents are too variable. You can have currents on the surface going in one way from Lake Huron into Lake Michigan, based on the wind, and you can have submerged currents going the opposite way.
Right, so that water column is, we don't know what it's going to be.
It's not a pool. It's in constant disequilibrium. It's moving back and forth. So the currents are one factor. The waves, if you get waves greater than a foot, booms don't work. If you get water depths greater than 50 feet, you can't anchor the booms.
Right.
9 months of the year, you're going to have waves at least 1 to 3 feet, if not 5 to 7, and you're going to have ice cover.
What happens in ice cover? Nothing, right?
No one knows.
Right.
We've never had a spill under ice cover.
I believe there's one icebreaker up there currently, meaning that they would have to literally break up the ice in order to address any oil. Enbridge has been very optimistic about addressing oil and ice. They think that they can control it much better, but there have been many scientists that have said that the currents still move and they still change and they move just as fast as they do when there's ice or when there's no ice. The difference is that you can address it and approach it when there's no ice, but when there's ice, everything is completely frozen over and you have no idea how things are moving.
Last year we invested $7 million in new ice recovery equipment that is made just for ice recovery to really enhance what we can do in ice. So
what do you do? It's not booms or it's not...
There's ice boom that's
Really?
special, that's heavier.
Goes underneath
That
the
kind of
ice?
thing. Well, it sits on it or sits in it after you break up the ice, those kind of things.
Okay, Exxon Valdez, did that deal with any ice?
I
Does a
think
different kind of thing.
It didn't at the time that it occurred.
Well, the wind response, as far as we know, is nearly impossible because there's never been a spill cleanup under ice. Not once. Not ever.
Well, we prepare for that.
And then if we also have the natural gas liquids that's released, we'll also have a plume of gas that is heavier than air. It'll just sit until it's addressed.
Really, the greatest risk with natural gas liquids is it would potentially explode.
Unfortunately, we've learned from another Line 5 spill that they address natural gas liquid leaks by lighting them on fire.
They're fire booms that you actually contain it in and then light it on fire within that fire boom. We did that with Deepwater Horizon, and it's done more frequely. It's just at this point in time, it hasn't been approved in the Great Lakes.
It just doesn't seem like it's going to work up there. It just seems like the movement of the water is too fast. It's too unpredictable.
It could work, but it has to be under very certain weather conditions.
Got to be under perfect.
It's got to be under very perfect conditions.
Really perfect conditions. You talk to Enbridge fairly often.
I do.
And how'd you forge a relationship with them when nobody else seems to be able to get them on the phone? We're wondering how you did that.
It took a lot of time and a lot of efforts. Part of it is making sure you maintain a level of respect.
You kiss their ass, or what? I mean, do you have to like? No. Okay.
No, we call them out just like everyone else does.
But you're diplomatic about it. You haven't come in like combative. You know.
We want to get the truth out there. We have nothing to hide as a company, and the more information that's out there, the better from our perspective. Because
Can I look at this thing behind you? Because this to me is misleading.
Okay, well, we're at 35 minutes.
Right. Most likely in the Straits of Mackinac, if something does happen, they will not be able to contain and recover it all.
That spill's going to get through Saginaw Bay. It's going to get into Port Huron. It's going to go down the St. Clair River. It's going to be in Lake St. Clair. It's going to be in Detroit. It's water intakes. It's going to be into Lake Erie.
Do we have an emergency plan when it comes to water whatsoever? Drinking
I've been around for 40 years in federal and multi-state government. No. The answer is no.
Enbridge will be responsible for providing alternative drinking water sources.
Mm-hmm.
And typically that'll be in the short term, probably bottled water.
There's an insufficient planning vision to protect us from our own mistakes.
Well, we found several gaps in the coding, and we believe that's the process working like it's supposed to. I mean, there are gaps where there are some areas where there is exposed metal that you can see.
But of what size?
The sizes range. I mean, they range from very small, you know, as we've said, around the size of a Band-Aid, that's one of them, up to more than a foot square. With the coating gaps, there was never an issue of safety. I mean, I want to stress that. There are these gaps. We've repaired just about all of them at this point. But there was never an issue of safety. The steel is in very good shape. When we look at the steel, we look for corrosion, we look for any kind of problems. There's none of that. There's no corrosion that we found on the Straits section of the pipeline.
Oh, this is another one. Yeah.
Is this a functional support here, or is that a bent support? Because that looks pretty precarious.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Does that mean that the pipe is shifted horizontally? I mean,
here's another one I found in a different place.
Well, the supports are steel saddles, you know, with 10-foot screws on both sides that kind of go over the pipeline and hold it right into place. And we've had good success with those as we've used them over the last 15 years.
So,
and here's the place where it looks like the pipe is slipped through the support. And all this indicates to me that the pipe is moving. This thing expands and contracts about 4 feet over the course of a year. So it moves around that way. And
just
another
from
thing...
temperature or from conditions?
The oil is much warmer than the Straits. The oil's hot.
Okay.
So when the thing's full of hot oil, it warms up the pipe. When they shut the flow of oil off, it shrinks by about 4 feet.
Okay. So are there points where the pipe has become stressed or bent or ovaled?
No, we haven't found any areas of concern where there's any kind of deformity or any issues like that. And we're looking for that all the time.
Well,
how are you figuring this out?
I was sitting there looking at the 2016 inspection video that NWF got, and I'm looking at it, and I just get started, and I see that. And it's not a very good print. It's hard to print. Those are both the same. I say, holy shit, that thing's bent.
You can clearly see how it's bent. I mean, the axis of it.
Right.
Yeah,
and so I sent it to pictures to a couple engineering buddies, and they said, yeah, that pipe's bent. That cued me then to go into Enbridge's inspection reports, which is where all this stuff comes from. And yeah, it's bent. They know all about it. They know the size of the bends. They know the how much the pipe is ovaled, and they had never revealed that to the state. I consider this to be a smoking gun.
As I said before, some of you weren't here, I live in Marshall, Michigan, and I was directly impacted by the oil spill in town. We lived on Talmadge Creek. As you study this, I think it's backwards. I think you shut down the line and then you see if it's safe. You do not keep the line running while you study whether it is safe. Thank you.
If Enbridge had to pay the true cost of their operation, the risk associated with it, they would shut that pipeline down themselves.